Police in Houston, Texas receive a report that 9-year-old Diana Rabola is missing. She's last seen at a grocery store just a few blocks from her home in Houston Heights. Andy Khan, collaborating with the Houston Police Department, is urgently brought in to serve as the critical link between law enforcement and a deeply concerned family.
I was involved almost immediately with the Diana Rabola case. And here's, somebody that's just walking down the street, buying a few items to take home for a family dinner. And boom.
2 days later, Diana's body is discovered on the loading dock of an abandoned building.
She was sexually assaulted, beaten, and then strangled.
She is found laying face up, a tourniquet wrapped tightly around her neck.
It's just unconscionable that someone can do this to a 9-year-old in the middle of the day. We're not talking about some isolated area. This is a populated part of the town. That's pretty brazen.
Detectives have encountered this chilling method of killing before. Diana's brutal murder bears an unsettling resemblance to another recent homicide. 2 years earlier, police discovered the body of 21-year-old Maria del Carmen Estrada in a parking lot behind a Dairy Queen in the Spring Branch neighborhood of Houston.
Maria was, a hard worker, trying to help her family, just taking public transportation to and from her work and just helping her family just go about life. And here she was again, vulnerable, by herself, no one else around. Seizing that opportunity, the killer abducts her, rapes her, kills her in excruciating slow fashion, and then dumps her.
Like Diana, Maria is found with a handmade tourniquet wrapped around her neck. District Attorney Kim Ogg is an assistant prosecutor in Harris County at the time. She's tasked with analyzing critical crime scene evidence.
When I'd worked in the Special Crimes Division of the Harris County District Attorney's Office, there were a series of crimes involving a signature mark, a tourniquet left on the bodies, which came across my desk. They were brought by homicide investigators who were working the cases, trying to figure out the whodunit.
The similarities between Diana and Maria, the time between deaths, and the method of murder lead investigators to fear they may be dealing with a serial killer.
The tourniquet takes your fingers off the pulse, literally, but it gave the killer the ability to turn life on and off.
He had a profile. We see that he's attacking younger Hispanic women, young girls.
This is so methodically calculated as to how he picked his victims. These were young girls from the ages of 9 to 21, not doing anything wrong.
Who is responsible? Police need to build a profile of the killer. They focus on the locations of his attacks, centered in those Houston neighborhoods increasingly home to Latin American immigrants.
The neighborhoods in Houston were changing in the late 80s and 90s. They were going dramatically downhill in certain areas. Part of it was we had an immigrant population, very low on the socioeconomic scale, many times, many of them not citizens of the country. And so that created an opportunity for a serial killer who was looking for people who he could grab, rape, kill, and who might not be missed.
The one common denominator his victims had, besides being young, were they were by themselves. And little did they know that how vulnerable that made them to a sadistic predator.
I felt like it was only a matter of time before the next body would show up. That gumshoe detective work was applied.
They were able to extract DNA from Maria Estrada's fingernails.
Could DNA found under Maria's fingertips be a killer's mistake? In 1992, CODIS, a combined DNA index system that links profiles across jurisdictions in different parts of the United States, is still in its infancy. No connections are found.
There was no general testing of DNA.
You had problems in crime labs, and all sorts of Murphy's Law was going on with so many different entities as far as getting a match.
Investigators carefully preserve the DNA found under Maria's fingernails, knowing forensic science and databases are advancing rapidly. They hold on to the evidence, hoping for the day that her killer slips up and reveals his identity.
Looking for a serial murder was like looking for a needle in a haystack. And so the DNA evidence was collected.
Detectives believe the killer has a clear profile for his victims. Now they're building one for him, knowing that to catch him, they must first understand him.
The way he would kill his victims shows you his true colors and his insatiable need to seek attention.
I think a master of lying and secrets and disguises and things that covered his trail.
Dr. Judy Ho, a renowned forensic neuropsychologist, highlights the critical importance of building a psychological profile to unmask the killer.
I think that there was a couple of components to this. One is very poor impulse control, so he just did whatever he felt like. But the other piece of it is that he probably derived some kind of sick joy from dominating people who were vulnerable. Notice that he doesn't necessarily dominate people who were his size. He's not picking on people who were his own size. And so he's looking for victims that he would clearly be declared the winner. It was rigged from the start.
Without any other objective evidence, police might never have been able to find the correct killer.
Investigators need forensic evidence, but the science and database technology isn't advanced enough to deliver results. Police receive a call about a missing teenager, Dana Sanchez. She is last seen leaving her home, only to vanish without trace.
Again, 16-year-old teenager, middle of the day, minding her own business, not doing anything wrong, not doing anything illegal, just doing what teenage girls do, you know?
A week goes by with no leads in Dana's disappearance, until a local news station receives an anonymous call from someone claiming to be her killer.
He has the audacity to contact a local news station and tip them off as to where the body could be found, just so he can make sure that he got credit for the latest murder in his own mind. That's mine.
The caller claims to be Dana Sanchez's killer.
He basically was telling the media that, yeah, there's a serial killer roaming loose out there, killing young girls, and you need to be aware of that.
When a local news station in Houston receives an anonymous call from a person who claims that he's a serial killer, police have to take it seriously.
To contact a local news station and tip them off as to where the body could be found. You can actually visualize him at home in front of the television waiting for the local news to capture the story of what he did, and him just salivating.
Looking for any clue in their search for 16-year-old Dana Sanchez, police arrive at a barren field on the outskirts of the city, and Dana's lifeless body lies sprawled, decomposing in the dirt.
She was tortured and just dumped like the rest of them. Someone that can do that without any care in the world and just leave her out there just to rot It's about the lowest of the low you could possibly imagine of a life form in this universe.
Still wrapped around Dana Sanchez's neck is the murder weapon, a tourniquet.
Diana Sanchez was a bit older, 16 years old. The MO is the same, he strangled her. We don't know much more else. We can assume she was probably sexually assaulted. What we do know is that a victim profile for sure has emerged.
The third young Hispanic woman strangled with a tourniquet in 3 years confirms investigators' fears. The suspected killer's call to a local news station leaves detectives fearing they're being lured into a dangerous game of cat and mouse.
He seemed to take pride, a sick kind of pride in his killing and in his technique with the tourniquet. It worked for him. It was his signature. And it distinguished him from other individuals who kill people with their bare hands.
Investigators have 3 victims, each with the murder weapon left at the scene. With no other clues to identify the killer, the case captures national attention. The media dubs the unknown predator the tourniquet killer, thrusting him into the spotlight.
Notoriety and fame that serial killers want and then ultimately achieve, and then all of a sudden you're a household name, your name's in the paper, your name's on the news. He so desperately wanted that.
The ensuing media frenzy may have been just what he wanted, but the pressure is on police to catch the killer.
Nobody could find anything.
For 3 years, police strive to make gains in identifying the tourniquet killer. They analyze the anonymous call made to the local news station. They look for further links between cases and meticulously gather forensic evidence. When a local telephone repairman is questioned by police for an unrelated crime, detectives see no reason to suspect a link to the elusive tourniquet killer.
Here's a guy that worked for the phone company, telephone company, Southwestern Bell, as a repairman.
Maybe you wouldn't suspect a family man that seemed happy in his marriage and in his family life.
His name is Anthony Shaw, and he is suspected of committing an horrific crime.
All of a sudden, Anthony Shaw does a despicable act when he sexually abuses and assaults his 2 young daughters. They make an outcry. He's arrested.
He raped his daughters, and his daughters' outcry spurred his arrest.
The repairman accused of sexually abusing his own children is 36-year-old Anthony Shaw. Investigators who are hopeful of convicting him for crimes against his own children search for any evidence from his past. What had made him such a monster?
A few things stand out for me about Shaw's early life, right? He's very precocious. He's already sort of making, 4 or 5-year-old what could be construed as sexual advances towards these little girls.
One of the biggest red flags was that he would actually torture animals at a young age. It shows a level of lack of empathy, lack of emotionality.
There was something going on with his sister as well, okay? Apparently he had stabbed her in the head with a screwdriver. And we know again also from later reports that she didn't seem to be very empathetic towards him as well. Shaw used his sister to lure girls in the neighborhood back to, his house, or to grope them, to kiss them.
I think he instilled fear in his own sisters. And I think there was a part of his sisters that probably feared for themselves. They didn't do what he asked. And even though they knew that this couldn't lead to anything good, they were manipulated by him. And they were doing so possibly out of their own self-protection.
While investigating Shaw for sexual abuse of his own children, detectives hear from friends and neighbors that he appeared ordinary.
For a while, Shaw had a normal life. In addition to working at a regular job during the day, in the evening he performed the piano. So he was, he was known amongst people who went and attended live music functions as well. There's some people that worked for the phone company astonished, and they were dumbfounded. They said, I worked with him. I know him. I went to lunch with Anthony Shore. I can't believe that's him. He was so nice, such a normal guy.
Anthony Shore seemed like a happily married man.
I do have to wonder about the true nature of that relationship. Did he really get married because he had genuine affection for this person, or was she basically used as a pawn in his game?
That's part of the facade that they try to maintain. That's kind of like their Jekyll and Hyde ego that they like to have. Is there some sort of normalcy where no one suspects anything?
We could see that from when Anthony was a child, from the torturing and killing of innocent animals to putting a screwdriver through his sister's head. So sadly, it's no surprise that he would definitely abuse his own family members as well.
It takes investigators 1 year to build a case against Shore for the abuse of his own daughters.
So Anthony Shore is convicted in 1998 of molesting his 2 daughters.
He's put on probation like many sex offenders are, particularly on your first offense, so that's not a surprise. He was put on probation. But the catch was he had to submit DNA as a result of now being a convicted sex offender.
When detectives confirm a match, they are stunned to discover that the assault on his family was just one piece of Shore's larger web of horrific crimes.
And this is the turning point in the case.
Five years after his conviction for the abuse of his own daughters, the combined DNA index system, CODIS, established by the FBI, allows law enforcement agencies to share and compare DNA profiles across jurisdictions.
Because the laws had changed and DNA samples could and were taken from individuals charged with certain crimes, his sample was entered into CODIS, the national system for matching DNA to known individuals or unknown individuals.
When detectives check Anthony Shore's DNA against unsolved crimes on the CODIS network, it reveals a match they've been looking for 8 years.
The DNA was then ultimately matched from Estrada's fingernails.
6 years into an 8-year sentence of probation for indecency with a child, and 11 years since Maria del Carmen Estrada's murder, investigators in Houston arrest telephone repairman Anthony Shore.
There wasn't anything to link him with the murders until you were able to run his DNA.
Police are confident that whoever killed Maria del Carmen Estrada is also responsible for killing Diana Rabola and Dana Sanchez. But with no DNA available from the scene of those crimes, detectives decide to confront Anthony Shore in an interview. Detectives gear up for a high-stakes showdown and interrogation, hoping it will be the key to breaking the case wide open. As the interview begins, Shore sits down and calmly presents his version of events, while the officers tread carefully, uncertain of what lies ahead.
And I ran across this really a beautiful young lady for your ride. She turned me down. But she was on my way to work every morning.
Shore initially admits to officers that he did meet Maria del Carmen Estrada on the day that she went missing.
One day it was misting rain. She saw me, asked me for a ride. It was going places. She was talking about, yeah, she wanted to go out. Well, we pulled in. We wanted a Dairy Queen. You know, rescue. Yeah, rescue. It was going okay. She was amenable to a kiss.
Listening to Shore recount these events, I don't hear the self-absorbed narcissist that people might attribute to him. I hear someone telling a story very matter-of-factly, all right? It lacks empathy, right? But it's not embellished.
When I pushed her further, I got out of hand. She remember I opened her glass and she was resisting. When I just sleep consumption, not like voices in my head, but just driven. That I was going to have her regardless. I don't know what the hell you call it. I've tried to understand this, but I wanted to possess her somehow. She became real violent, just fighting, wanting to get out of the car.
Detectives brace themselves as Anthony Shaw begins to talk, and then talk some more. What he says next will change the entire course of the investigation.
I didn't set out to kill her. That was not my intent. But it got out of hand. I strangled her.
Detectives are stunned by Shaw's chilling honesty. The interview takes a dramatic turn as he begins what appears to be a confession, claiming he strangled Maria del Carmen Estrada.
When he was interviewed by law enforcement, there did seem to be a desire to clear his conscience.
Officers, keeping calm as Shaw confesses to murder, are blindsided by a new revelation. In 1993, 14-year-old Selma, a name used as a pseudonym to protect her identity, suffers a brutal attack. Is another mystery about to be solved?
I'm guessing she was probably 16, 17 at the time. I'm not really sure how old. She was young, she was attractive. She was a latchkey kid coming home from high school or whatever school she was going to. So I had broken into the house, which wasn't easy. The door was unlocked, and I waited for her to get there.
So the living rape victim was a young person whose house he surveilled for several days. Shore was a telephone lineman. He had access to every neighborhood in Houston.
You can basically spy on so many different people throughout the day.
He had a reason to be there. He had a marked vehicle. It made it totally easy for him to just look for victims and exercise his demon.
And I wanted to prove to myself that I didn't have to take a life and tie her up with electrical cord and raped her.
I didn't know of her existence when I worked on Deanna's case and on Carmen's case in the early 90s until he admitted to them a decade later, after he was already caught and his DNA identified and matched.
Shaw holds back from taking Selma's life, but he confesses to detectives his insatiable urge to kill will ultimately become unstoppable.
Strangely, she fought like hell. I mean, just wouldn't go along with anything.
The details he provides about the targeting of 9-year-old Diana Rabola are devastating.
And she was so afraid, I'm sure, that I don't recall what type of cord or string or piece of wire or something. And did the same thing. I knew it, and I don't know why. It kept happening. I couldn't stop it.
I think Anthony Shaw wants to be a paradox to the country. Yet on one hand, he wants credit for these brutal rapes and murders and anything else he wants. Yet at the same time, he wants everybody to know how sorry he was and please ask for my forgiveness and so forth. You know what? That day's long gone. You blew that.
For detectives tasked with proving the case against him, Shaw's confessions are a treasure trove, and he's far from finished. As he keeps talking, he unveils chilling details about how he crossed paths with Dana Sanchez in 1995.
I was making a corner, I just said, hey, if you love, go ahead. She says, man, I'm going to see my boyfriend somewhere. I forget where she told me. I said, no problem. Jump right in.
He's going to younger girls to comfort himself, okay? If he starts actually now talking to this girl and confiding in her, it's probably because he knows that older women would think him strange, right? Younger girl is going to listen.
I was flirting with her heavily. At the time I had really long hair. She was jokingly, no, I've got a boyfriend, this and that. So I grabbed her, pulled her into the back of the van. I knew there was nothing I could do to get out of this. And I used a ligature in the oiler. I want to say it was a yellow twisted nylon rope, but I don't remember for sure.
The profile of Shore's victim resembles very much the little girls he used to entice over to his house vis-a-vis his sister. Shore is on his way back to childhood.
I pulled her out into a field and left like a bat out of hell, scared to death. Do you know how her body got found? Yes, I do. What? An anonymous phone call. And who made that phone call? I did.
Shore admits the anonymous tip that led investigators to Dana Sanchez's body came from Shore himself.
And when Dana's not found, I guess, I gotta get some sort of attention. Someone's got to know about it. Anthony Shore, obviously was in tune with the news of what he had done. And evidently, since nobody knew, particularly the media, nobody was broadcasting to the world, particularly local news, wasn't telling anybody about the latest murder. He certainly wanted credit, wanted to be known.
In Texas, full disclosure can lead to plea deals, even in cases involving serial killers. If Shore is trying to avoid death row, his chilling arrogance suggests he won't succeed. He seems to take a twisted pride in recounting his crimes. He then delivers yet another shocking revelation.
Anthony had another victim.
It's unfathomable what happened to her, and she was the first.
She started freaking out, and I begged her. I said, please stop. Do this. Let me just give you a ride. She's like, no. I freaked out. I don't know what came over me.
Anthony Shore reveals that 6 years before killing Maria del Carmen Estrada, there's another victim.
Lori's case was in 1986.
Lori's 14 years old. I mean, think about your children who are 14 years old. I mean, it's unfathomable what happened to her.
Laurie Tremblay was full of life, bright, happy, deeply loved, but oblivious to the danger that she faced if coming into contact with Anthony Shore.
Laurie was walking to school, doing what thousands and millions of youngsters do every day.
One morning, this girl comes up and asks me for a cigarette while I was at the stoplight. I asked if she needed a ride. And I gave her a ride. And a couple days went by. She saw me. I gave her a ride again to school. She and I became involved just in the sense of kissing. Hello, goodbye. I started giving her a ride on a semi-regular basis.
He keeps returning and develops this very strange relationship with a much younger girl, which is not outside his modus operandi if you consider his daughters, and starts to confide in her, right? And she listens to him. He decides to up the ante, and wants to kiss, wants to take it further.
One day it was misting rain. She saw me and asked me for a ride. And I wanted to get more involved than just the kissing and stuff. And I undid her bra. Everything got out of hand. She freaked out. And we got into a fight.
As Shore speaks, the revelations come thick and fast. Details that would have stayed hidden if not for the DNA breakthrough that shattered the case wide open. The officers listen intently, piecing together the chilling truth that he's finally laying bare.
This one freaked out, threatened to tell, and that was the stress that created that, unempathetic low impulse. Everything was just on super drive.
I tried to knock her out because I just really freaked out. It's not right. I'm not justifying it. It's hard to talk about. I took this cotton cord and I tried to make sure that she would never ever tell anybody, even though I knew that was insane.
He tells investigators he didn't use his signature tourniquet on Laurie. He says that his trademark killing method was adopted after an accident during her murder.
So Shore changes his MO and uses this tourniquet because he claims that he injured his finger while murdering Laurie Lee Tremblay with his own bare hands.
Shaw claims to have callously dumped Laurie's body behind a Mexican restaurant before returning to work. And that same evening, he performs piano at a local jazz club.
That's how the serial killers operate. They blend in, so they remain anonymous, so they don't tip off that there's anything wrong with them.
If detectives accept Shaw's claims of full disclosure, Laurie Tremblay emerges as his first murder victim.
Six to 7 years passed between his rape and strangulation of Laurie Lee Tremblay in 1986 and his rape and strangulation of Maria del Carmen Estrada in 1992. This is suggestive of that cooling off period that the FBI developed many years ago, right? Serial killers, 2 to 3 victims, at least over a period of time with a cooling off period.
Investigators' research tells them many serial killers follow a pattern known as the killing cycle, which typically progresses through 7 distinct phases.
In the first phase, there's this aura phase where you start to withdraw from society. And then you begin to troll your victim, right? We're all familiar with that term now, thanks to social media. Then there's this flirting phase, phase 3. Phase 4 is when you capture the victim. Phase 5 is when you murder them. 6 is when you take something of theirs, a totem or a trophy, which I prefer. And then 7 is depression. 7 is so this 6-year period, he is undergoing some sort of catharsis, some sort of chrysalis phase. And he's going to come back with a vengeance.
Despite Shaw confessing to 4 murders and a sexual assault, he has not been tried. Detectives focus on charging him with Maria del Carmen Estrada's killing, backed by the strongest forensic evidence. Held without bail, investigators intensify their efforts to verify his chilling claims.
Just going through the evidence, working hard, interviewing people.
Investigators build a case based on DNA evidence, Shaw's confessions, and the modus operandi of the tourniquet killer. In October 2004, Shaw appears at the District Court of Harris County, charged with the murders of Laurie Tremblay, Maria del Carmen Estrada, Diana Rabola, and Dana Sanchez. He pleads guilty.
Sometimes we do see, on very rare occasions, somebody who truly feels like they are born evil, and I believe that that's Anthony.
In hindsight, we see red flags. At a very early age, the starting of a recipe for a serial killer.
On November 15th, 2004, a jury sentences Anthony Shaw to death by execution.
The people whose children and family members were murdered are broken from the crimes of Anthony Shaw. And there's really nothing that we in the system can do to fix what happened to them. But I do believe that by finishing the case and asking that the sentence be carried out, that at least they can move on. And there are no future dates for them to have to worry about. No more court appearances, no last-minute appeals. It's finally over for the justice system. Of course, the pain that's caused those victims is never over.
District Attorney Kim Ogg becomes responsible for scheduling Shaw's execution.
When I became the Harris County District Attorney, my prior relationship with Anthony Shaw, our paths crossed again all these years later. And it became my duty to schedule executions of people who had already received the death penalty, Shore's name was on the list. And because of the age of the case, the overwhelming evidence, the fact that I knew Shore's work, I felt it was appropriate that he be the next in line for execution.
But as his execution date looms, the now bald Shore delivers yet another shocking confession that leaves investigators reeling.
He comes forward with these 11th hour confessions to buy himself time. Could have been seeking to extend his own life. He bragged about up to, I think, 60 additional rapes.
I learned that there were, according to him, many other rape victims. We've only learned that as his death date approached. And that he considered it an accomplishment to be able to rape women without murdering them. And so he confessed to a number of alleged rapes that he said he committed on women that he met in social settings or bars, where he would slip them Rohypnol, the date rape drug, take them to his van, rape them, sometimes sell them to others, and then deliver them back, supposedly without them knowing what had happened to them.
Where I knew we weren't through with him. So it wasn't surprising to me that after he was executed, all of a sudden we find out he was claiming 60 some odd sexual assaults, rapes, and any other horrific offenses.
Law enforcement will look at the claims that he made, and we'll go back and look for old cases. I would hope that anyone watching this who came into contact with Shore and who felt like they might have been violated, whether the statutes run or not, whether it was ever reported, I hope they'll let law enforcement know.
On January 18th, 2018, 55-year-old Anthony Shore is executed by lethal injection.
I don't think we're ever going to know what was going through Anthony Shore's mind at the time of his death, but I don't see how it couldn't have been the faces of his victims.
I can tell you from being up in Huntsville the day of the execution with the victims' families, unequivocally, Anthony Allen Shore's reign of terror ended that day for them, and justice was carried out.
We're rethinking the death penalty all over America. I think Americans are evolving in the way we look at it. I know that I am. But when you look at a guy like Anthony Shore, in my 30 years, he is the worst of the worst. And as long as the law exists, unfortunately, there are going to be individuals like Shore. But he earned his way to the top of the list on Texas's death row.
There's a reason we have the death penalty in the state of Texas. And Anthony Allen Shore is numero uno why we have it.
Well, there's a lot we can learn from Anthony Shore. In looking at people, we can't tell. No one can tell who's a murderer and who's not. I think that we have to support science and technology in and applied to criminal justice. We should never get away from the basics as law enforcement and prosecutors, but that science like DNA has revolutionized criminal justice in my lifetime.
I vividly will never forget Anthony Allen Shore and the murders of Maria, Dana, Diana, and Lori. I think if anything you're going to take away from this is never assume if you're out walking by yourself that you're not going to be targeted or you're not going to be a victim. Because like it or not, there's Anthony Allen Shores walking and living amongst us today. That's the sad reality. They are your next door neighbors, they're your coworkers, they're your friends, your business partners, people you recreate with, people you go out to dinner with. You just don't know. And he's living proof of that.
When Anthony Shore claimed the lives of his victims, he believed his crimes would remain buried in the shadows, beyond the reach of justice. But what Shore didn't count on were the leaps in science and forensic technology that would one day catch up with him.
His daughter's outcry spurred his arrest, which led to the DNA sample being taken from him because he was convicted. And when his sample was entered into the CODIS database, it matched.
What he did to his 2 daughters ends up solving the murders of the 4 young girls, because if he hadn't committed those atrocities, the abuses on his daughters, who knows if it would have ever been solved.
Leaving a trail of forensic evidence that connected his horrific crimes against his children to a series of murders was a killer's mistake.
When we lock our doors at night, we are participating in a profound, shared social illusion. We inherently believe that a piece of metal, turned securely within a wooden or steel frame, is enough to separate us from the unpredictable darkness that exists in the outside world. We believe that the walls of our homes are impervious boundaries that preserve our sanctuary. But more fundamentally than the locks on our doors, we rely on a much larger, much more significant system of barriers to keep us safe. We trust the justice system. We trust that when the most dangerous and violent individuals among us are apprehended, they are permanently removed from society, placed behind impenetrable concrete walls, and watched over by vigilant, unyielding eyes. We sleep soundly in our beds because we hold onto the absolute conviction that the monsters have been caged. In the 1990s, the ordinary citizens living in the quiet neighborhoods in the vicinity of the Tafuna Correctional Facility in American Samoa shared this fundamental, comforting belief. They went to sleep each night under the assumption that the massive, imposing structure located nearby was a fortress designed exclusively to protect the innocent from the guilty. They could not have possibly known that this supposed fortress was entirely compromised, functioning not as a secure cage, but as a revolving door for a highly cunning and ruthless predator. The Tafuna Correctional Facility during this specific era represented a colossal, systemic failure of administrative oversight and basic security protocols. It is a universal truth that a prison is only as secure as the people who are employed to guard it, and in this specific facility, the human element had catastrophically deteriorated. The nightly routine, which by all standard penal codes should have been characterized by rigorous patrols, strict and frequent head counts, and an unwavering commitment to order, was instead marked by an astonishing, almost incomprehensible level of negligence. The guards, who were officially entrusted with the safety of both the inmates and the surrounding community, treated their heavy responsibilities with a dangerous degree of apathy. Nighttime patrols were conducted superficially, if they were conducted at all. The essential, foundational mechanisms of confinement, the heavy locks on the cell doors, and the constant surveillance of the dimly lit corridors, were managed with such terrifying looseness that the very concept of incarceration completely lost its meaning. It was an environment desperately ripe for exploitation, simply waiting for a mind calculating enough to recognize the immense, gaping holes in the system. That specific mind belonged to a man named Bernard. Bernard was not simply a violent offender driven by blind impulse. He was a remarkably cunning, deeply observant individual who understood the fundamental weaknesses of the institution meant to hold him captive. While other inmates might have viewed the prison as an inescapable, permanent reality of their poor choices, Bernard viewed it through a different lens. He saw it as an incredibly advantageous, completely secure base of operations. He spent his time observing the guards. He carefully noted the superficial, predictable nature of their nightly rounds. He recognized with cold clarity that the heavy iron doors and the formidable exterior architecture of the Tafuna Correctional Facility were nothing more than a theatrical facade, a display of security that held absolutely no real substance once the sun went down and the territory grew quiet. Bernard realized something deeply chilling. The prison system was not keeping him locked inside, but rather it was keeping the suspicion of the outside world firmly locked out. The dark brilliance of Bernard's plan lay in its devastating simplicity and its ruthless manipulation of basic human logic. If a horrific, violent crime occurs in a quiet residential neighborhood in the dead of night, law enforcement investigators will naturally look for suspects among the free population. They will canvass the streets, looking for drifters, known local criminals with a history of violence, or individuals who cannot account for their whereabouts during the time of the attack. The absolute last place any seasoned detective would ever think to look for a primary suspect in a late-night home invasion and sexual assault is inside a locked, maximum security cell block. Bernard knew this undeniable fact. He understood that his physical presence on the official prison roster provided him with the ultimate, impenetrable shield against any future investigation. It was the absolute perfect alibi, ironically forged and maintained by the very state entity that sought to punish him. He could commit the most heinous acts imaginable in the dark, and the official government records would unequivocally state that he was locked safely away, miles from the scene of the crime, asleep under the watchful eyes of the state. This calculated, methodical exploitation of a broken institutional system transforms this case from a standard, familiar story of a prison breakout into a profound, psychological nightmare. The residents of the neighborhoods immediately surrounding the Tafuna Correctional Facility were unwittingly living next door to a violent predator who had essentially been granted an invisibility cloak by the government's own incompetence. The close geographical proximity of the civilian homes to the prison, rather than being a source of anxiety, might have even offered a false sense of security to the locals. One might reasonably assume that an area heavily populated by law enforcement personnel, administrative staff, and correctional officers would naturally be the safest, most heavily monitored place in the entire territory. This tragic assumption made the nearby homes the absolute perfect hunting ground for Bernard. He did not need to arrange transportation or travel vast distances to find his victims. The innocent targets were mere steps away from the very institution that was supposedly guaranteeing their safety and peace of mind. The crime that was about to unfold was not a crime of sudden passion, nor was it a random, chaotic act of unpredictable violence. It was a premeditated, systemic exploitation of deep institutional rot. Bernard's shocking ability to physically leave his assigned cell at night, navigate the interior of the prison, and exit the building without raising a single alarm speaks volumes about the complete collapse of professional duty within the Tafuna Correctional Facility at that time. The locks were either easily bypassed through primitive methods or simply, inexplicably left unsecured by the staff. The long corridors were devoid of vigilant oversight or functioning security measures. The exterior perimeter, which should have been an absolute, insurmountable barrier topped with wire and watched by guards, was dangerously porous. Bernard could smoothly transition from a violent convict serving his mandated time to a free-roaming, lethal predator in the time it took to quietly turn a door handle and step out into the humid night air of American Samoa. Once outside the physical, concrete confines of his cell block, the night completely belonged to him. The natural darkness of the island provided necessary physical cover, but his true, impenetrable cover was the institutional incompetence of his jailers. He moved through the shadows with the terrifying confidence of a man who knew he technically did not exist in the eyes of the law at that precise moment. Officially, according to every piece of paperwork in the warden's office, he was behind bars. Unofficially, he was stalking the quiet, sleeping streets of the adjacent civilian community, actively searching for a vulnerable target. The profound horror of this scenario lies not just in the impending, brutal violence, but in the absolute helplessness of the unsuspecting victims. They were entirely defenseless, engaging in the most fundamental and vulnerable of human activities, sleeping deeply in their own beds, completely enveloped in the assumed, unquestioned sanctity of their own home. The sanctity of the home is a universal, foundational human concept. It is the one specific place in the world where an individual is supposed to be entirely safe from the predators, the chaos, and the dangers of the outside world. To have that sanctity violently violated by an intruder is a profound trauma that instantly shatters a person's foundational understanding of safety and order. But to have that sacred sanctity violated by someone who is simultaneously being housed, fed, and theoretically guarded by the justice system is an incomprehensible betrayal of the public trust. The local couple who would tragically soon become Bernard's victims went to sleep that fateful night completely unaware that the very system designed and funded to protect them was actually facilitating their worst nightmare. They were completely unaware that a hardened, exceptionally violent criminal was silently navigating the incredibly short distance between the prison's porous, unguarded boarders, and their fragile bedroom window. This specific case, officially known as American Samoa versus Bernard, forces us to deeply confront the absolute darkest possibilities of institutional failure. It demands that we ask ourselves what happens when the designated guardians fall asleep at their critical posts, and the monsters inside realize that the cage doors have been left wide open. Bernard's horrific actions were undoubtedly driven by a profound, internal malice, but it is an undeniable fact that they were enabled and facilitated by a breathtaking level of systemic negligence. The perfect alibi he so carefully constructed was not forged through elaborate, sophisticated deception on the outside, but through the simple, terrifying realization that the inside of the prison was entirely unmonitored. He effectively weaponized the prison itself, turning a place of supposed punishment and rehabilitation into a safe, secure sanctuary for his continued depravity. As we prepare to delve into the harrowing details of this terrifying night in the 1990s, we must constantly keep in mind the stark, devastating contrast between the violent, calculating nature of the perpetrator and the absolute, peaceful vulnerability of his sleeping victims. We must critically examine how a complex system meant to uphold justice and protect the innocent instead provided a literal haven for a monster to hide in plain sight. The chilling story of Bernard is a permanent, dark reminder that physical walls, heavy iron doors, and barbed wire mean absolutely nothing if the human vigilance and professional integrity behind them completely fail. The quiet night he slipped out of the Tafuna Correctional Facility to stalk the nearby, unsuspecting residents, he shattered much more than just a physical window. He permanently shattered the fundamental, essential trust between a community and the very system sworn to protect it. The illusion of safety was about to be violently torn away, exposing the terrifying reality that sometimes the most dangerous threats are not kept safely away in the dark, but are allowed by the system itself to walk right out the front door. The positive identification of Bernard within the walls of the very facility that was supposed to keep him confined triggered an immediate, explosive, and profoundly consequential legal earthquake throughout the entire American Samoan justice system. The fallout was not merely a matter of simple courtroom procedure, it was a total, undeniable systemic collapse of the territorial penal authority. Following the unequivocal identification of Bernard as the assailant, the district attorney's office initiated a series of aggressive, multi-layered criminal proceedings that were designed to address the sheer scale of his criminal activities and, crucially, to force a public accounting of how such a catastrophic failure had occurred. The indictment that followed was an exhaustive, crushing catalog of violent offenses. Bernard was formally charged with a cascading sequence of felony counts, including but not limited to aggravated sexual assault, attempted murder, burglary of a dwelling, and the unauthorized, clandestine departure from a secured correctional facility. The sheer weight of these charges reflected the intense, pervasive, and lingering trauma of the victimized couple, whose lives had been permanently and irrevocably divided into two distinct, unequal parts: the peaceful existence before the invasion and the agonizing, terror-filled life that followed. The courtroom proceedings, held under the intense, unrelenting scrutiny of an enraged and profoundly concerned public, became the primary arena where the stark, horrific contrast between the perpetrator's cold-blooded, calculated actions and the victim's courageous, unwavering pursuit of truth was displayed in graphic, painful detail. Bernard, throughout the entirety of the pretrial motions and the subsequent trial, maintained an icy, detached, and utterly unrepentant demeanor that deeply repulsed everyone present in the courtroom. He sat in his chair, a massive, imposing figure now confined by actual, meaningful restraints, as he listened to the chillingly detailed, step-by-step reconstruction of his nightly criminal excursions. The prosecution team, led by a cadre of deeply experienced and highly motivated trial attorneys, did not rely on complex, speculative theories or convoluted, circumstantial arguments to build their case. Instead, they built their entire presentation upon the foundational, undeniable pillar of the victim's testimony. They meticulously and repeatedly guided the court through the exact, terrifying sequence of events on that night: the calculated slip past the negligent guards, the silent navigation through the shadows of the prison periphery, the brutal, premeditated breach of the private bedroom, and, most crucially, the vivid, horrifying, and life-altering moment of visual recognition enabled by the municipal streetlight. The prosecutor's strategy was to systematically dismantle any possibility of doubt in the minds of the judge and the jury, transforming the abstract concept of Bernard's supposed alibi into a laughable, transparent, and highly offensive lie. They presented the prison logs, the duty rosters, and the administrative reports, not to prove Bernard's innocence, but to showcase the staggering, almost criminal level of negligence that had allowed him to treat a maximum security prison as a literal, unrestricted, and highly convenient base of operations for his violent, nocturnal predations. Each witness, from the responding police officers to the forensic experts, painted an increasingly grim and damning picture of an institution that had completely abdicated its most fundamental responsibility to the public trust. The husband, acting as a crucial, emotional anchor for the entire case, provided a raw, powerful, and deeply moving account of his desperate fight for his wife's life. His testimony served to humanize the statistical, often cold, and bureaucratic nature of the felony counts, forcing the courtroom to feel the visceral, adrenaline-fueled, and life-or-death reality of that night. He spoke, with shaking voice and tear-filled eyes, of the moment he woke to find his beloved partner being choked, of the sharp, lethal blade glinting in the dark, and of the frantic, chaotic violence of the struggle that had ultimately forced the attacker to retreat. His account of the fight was not presented as an act of heroism, but as a necessary, instinctual, and agonizing reaction to a nightmare that no one should ever be forced to endure. The defense team, caught in an incredibly difficult, virtually impossible position, attempted to utilize every procedural, technical, and argumentative tool at their disposal to cast doubt on the identification, but they were effectively paralyzed by the strength and, more importantly, the unwavering consistency of the victim's testimony. They tried to suggest that the traumatic, hyper-aroused state of the victim's brain during the attack had somehow distorted her memory, that the lighting conditions from the street lamp were too faint, too inconsistent, or too distracting to allow for an accurate, positive identification. They even attempted to lean into the inherent unlikelihood of a prisoner successfully bypassing multiple layers of security to commit a crime and then returning safely to his cell, arguing that it was fundamentally contrary to human behavior and institutional logic. However, all these efforts, while professionally necessary, rang completely hollow and disingenuous in the face of the overwhelming, factual reality of the situation. The jury, comprised of local, everyday citizens who lived in the same neighborhoods that Bernard had so callously terrorized, did not need to be convinced by complex legal maneuvering. They were already intimately familiar with the fear he had instilled, and they were already deeply invested in the immediate, final restoration of order and justice. The verdict, when it finally arrived, was swift, decisive, and entirely unanimous. Bernard was found guilty on every single count, an outcome that brought a moment of profound, shared relief to the entire community, though it could never truly undo the profound, deep, and lasting damage that he had inflicted upon his victims. The sentencing phase that followed was equally severe and underscored the absolute gravity of the situation. The presiding judge, in delivering his final, blistering rebuke of the defendant's actions, explicitly highlighted the sickening, predatory nature of the crimes and, equally importantly, the grave, unforgivable betrayal of the public trust that the entire episode represented. Bernard was sentenced to a lengthy, consecutive series of prison terms that effectively guaranteed he would remain completely removed from society for the rest of his life, a sentence that was universally viewed by the public as the only fair, appropriate, and truly just outcome given the severity, the brutality, and the profoundly disturbing nature of his crimes. As the gavel fell, effectively and finally ending the judicial phase of this long, arduous ordeal, the focus of the community and the media shifted away from the courtroom and toward the broader, systemic implications of the case. The sentence was not just a punishment for an individual, it was a forceful, unequivocal, and final judicial statement that no amount of systemic, administrative, or institutional failure could ever justify, excuse, or mitigate the actions of a predator who exploited the very system meant to keep him in check. The trial had, in essence, served as a profound, public exorcism of the rot that had allowed Bernard to exist as a criminal ghost, constantly flickering between the shadow of his cell and the terrifying light of his victim's home. The entire process had been an agonizing, exhausting, and emotionally devastating experience for the survivors, yet they had navigated the long, difficult path of the trial with incredible resilience, dignity, and grace, ultimately ensuring that their voices were heard, their truth was established, and their attacker was permanently and definitively removed from the world. The legal success was not a cure for their trauma, but it was an essential, foundational step in their long, difficult journey toward personal recovery and towards reclaiming the sense of safety that had been so cruelly, violently, and permanently shattered on that fateful, dark night in the 1990s. The judicial finality was a victory, not just for the couple, but for the entire concept of the rule of law within American Samoa, confirming that despite the deep, dark, and often ugly failures of the institutions designed to protect us, the truth, when pursued with absolute courage and unwavering persistence, can eventually and finally triumph over even the most persistent, clever, and dark shadows of systemic incompetence. The sentencing of Bernard became a permanent, recorded part of the territorial archives, a stark, sobering, and eternally relevant cautionary tale that would serve as a powerful, haunting reminder to every future administrator, guard, and official that the sanctity of their duty is not an optional, bureaucratic exercise, but an absolute, fundamental obligation that, when ignored, results in the destruction of innocent lives and the catastrophic, total collapse of the community's trust in the basic, essential structures of justice and order. The ripples caused by the American Samoa versus Bernard case did not simply dissipate with the final gavel fall in the courtroom. Instead, they transformed into a tidal wave of public demand for accountability, reform, and a complete reevaluation of the territorial correctional infrastructure. The aftermath of this horrific incident forced the citizens of American Samoa to confront a deeply uncomfortable and profoundly shaking reality. The very institutions they had blindly entrusted with their safety have been operating, at least in the case of the Tafuna Correctional Facility, with a level of catastrophic negligence that bordered on the criminal. This realization did not lead to a collective resignation to fear, but rather ignited a determined, fierce, and sustained movement for systemic change that would fundamentally reshape the way the territory managed its incarcerated population for decades to come. The initial, immediate public reaction was one of visceral, overwhelming outrage, a collective emotional response that was entirely justified given the nature of the breach. People were no longer able to sleep with the same sense of passive, assumed security that had once characterized their quiet island lives. They recognized that the thin, fragile walls of their homes were meaningless if the very entity responsible for keeping dangerous, violent offenders locked away was, in effect, providing them with a nightly pass to freedom. This profound loss of security prompted a necessary, if agonizing, period of public reflection, where the community began to ask the hard, uncomfortable, and essential questions about the quality of their public servants, the integrity of their correctional procedures, and the absolute, fundamental responsibility of the state to its citizens. The systemic fallout at the Tafuna Correctional Facility was both immediate and severe. The sheer, damning evidence exposed during the trial, the documented history of missed headcounts, the lax enforcement of basic lockdown protocols, the casual, unprofessional attitude of the guards, and the complete absence of effective perimeter monitoring left no room for denial or obfuscation from the facility's leadership. The pressure from the public, combined with the clear, judicial condemnation of the prison's failures, necessitated an immediate, top-to-bottom administrative purge. Personnel who had been found to be directly or indirectly responsible for the lapse in duty were removed from their positions, unnecessary if late, acknowledgement that professional apathy in a correctional setting carries lethal, real-world consequences. But the reform movement went far beyond the simple replacement of staff. It required a comprehensive, top-tier assessment of the physical security architecture itself. The facility underwent a massive, intensive overhaul aimed at sealing every single point of potential failure. New, high-security locking systems were installed, surveillance technology was modernized, and the protocols for nightly rotations and inmate accountability were completely rewritten to eliminate the very loopholes that Bernard had so calculatingly and brutally exploited. The goal was to transform the Tafuna Correctional Facility from a porous, revolving door of institutional convenience back into what it was always meant to be, an impenetrable, highly secure, and rigorously monitored bastion of confinement. However, the true legacy of this case remains etched not in the updated security manuals or the new, reinforced perimeter fences, but in the permanent, psychological shift in the collective consciousness of the American Samoan community. This case served as a harsh, permanent, and necessary lesson that safety is not a static, guaranteed state of existence provided by the government, but a fragile, active condition that requires constant, vigilant attention from both the state and the citizens themselves. The residents learned the difficult, sobering truth that the institutional failures of the justice system, no matter how remote they might seem to the average, law-abiding individual, can, with devastating speed and precision, manifest directly in the bedroom of an innocent family. This understanding did not make the population paranoid, but it did make them profoundly more observant, more engaged, and more skeptical of institutional claims of perfect order. The case of Bernard became a permanent, chilling, and essential touchstone in the territorial history, a story that parents would pass down to their children as a sobering reminder of the importance of community awareness and the potential consequences of civic indifference. It ensured that the voice of the traumatized victims would continue to echo long after the perpetrator had been removed from the public sphere, serving as a constant, haunting, and vital reminder to every future official that the public trust is a sacred, heavy, and fragile burden that must be held with absolute, uncompromising integrity. As we look back at the harrowing trajectory of this crime, we are forced to grapple with a deeply profound, universal question. How can a system designed specifically to mitigate and punish human darkness become its most effective, efficient, and reliable facilitator? The story of Bernard, at its most fundamental level, is an indictment of the human element within institutional structures. Laws, policies, regulations, and concrete buildings are ultimately just inanimate, lifeless frameworks. They are completely dependent upon the individuals entrusted with their operation, the people who must wake up every day and choose to perform their duty with focus, precision, and moral courage. When that individual, human element fails, when guards choose apathy over duty, when administrators choose convenience over security, and when officials choose the path of least resistance over the rigorous enforcement of standards, the most sophisticated system in the world becomes absolutely, fatally useless. Bernard was, in many ways, an astute, predatory student of this human failing, a man who possessed the dark, chilling insight to recognize that the most secure-looking wall is ultimately just a symbolic barrier, and that the true, real, and meaningful security rests entirely in the hands of the individuals who hold the keys. The courage shown by the survivors of this attack remains the most enduring, significant, and redeeming element of this entire, dark narrative. Despite the unimaginable trauma, the deep, personal violation of their sanctuary, and the exhausting, grueling process of holding the system and the perpetrator accountable, they displayed an incredible, steadfast strength that serves as a beacon of light in what is otherwise a profoundly bleak, upsetting, and unsettling story. They were not just victims of a violent crime. They were active, essential participants in the pursuit of justice, refusing to be silenced, refusing to accept the bureaucratic excuses of the prison administration, and refusing to allow their attacker to hide behind the very system that had failed them. Their actions forced the entire territory to face the truth, to acknowledge the failure, and to take the necessary, painful, and essential steps toward rectifying a broken and dangerous state of affairs. Their survival, their resilience, and their refusal to back down despite the overwhelming, persistent, and terrifying pressure of the legal process is a testament to the fundamental power of the human spirit to triumph over even the most horrific, calculated, and systemic depravity. In the final, ultimate, and sobering analysis, The American Samoa versus Bernard case stands as a permanent, cautionary monument to the fragility of our social contracts. It reminds us that the safety we enjoy, the peace we assume, and the order we rely upon are built upon a series of deeply important, interconnected, and highly vulnerable institutional pillars. If any one of those pillars is allowed to crack, to rot, or to completely collapse due to human negligence or systemic indifference, the entire structure of our daily, peaceful existence is placed in immediate, lethal jeopardy. It is a story that refuses to be forgotten, not because it is a story of a horrific crime, but because it is a story about the absolute, necessary, and vital nature of personal, institutional, and civic accountability. It stands as a chilling, persistent, and eternal reminder to every society, to every correctional system, and to every citizen that the darkness is always waiting, constantly testing the perimeter, and that the only effective, true, and real defense we possess is our collective, unwavering, and eternal vigilance. The case of Bernard was a tragedy, a failure, and a nightmare, but it was also a catalyst for progress, a harsh, painful, and transformative moment that, while leaving deep, permanent, and visible scars, ultimately forced the entire American Samoan community to rebuild their sense of safety on a stronger, more informed, and significantly more secure foundation. The story continues to echo through the years, serving as a powerful, haunting, and essential directive to the living, to watch over each other, to hold those in power strictly and completely accountable, and to never, under any circumstances, take for granted the sacred, inviolable, and deeply fragile sanctity of the home. The memory of that night, of that victim's courage, and of the predator's final, justified fate remains an essential, integrated, and vital part of the history of the territory, a story that serves as an enduring, silent, and watchful guardian over the peaceful, quiet, and now much more secure, residential streets of the island, standing as a final, absolute, and unequivocal testament to the hard-won, dearly bought, and now deeply, truly, and permanently appreciated value of the rule of law and the fundamental, essential human right to live in absolute, well-defended, and long-lasting safety. The final, enduring legacy of the American Samoa versus Bernard case is etched into the very foundations of the Tafuna Correctional Facility and the broader territorial justice system, serving as a permanent, cautionary monument to the catastrophic consequences of administrative complacency. When we reflect upon the transformation that occurred in the wake of this nightmare, we are observing a profound shift from a culture of passive, institutional indifference to one of active, rigorous, and persistent oversight. The physical and operational changes at the prison, while essential, were merely the visible manifestations of a much deeper, more complex, and fundamentally necessary evolution in the way the territory perceived its responsibility to the public. For years, the facility had existed in a state of suspended reality where the official, paper-based existence of security, the logs, the head counts, the locked doors, was allowed to supersede the tangible, operational reality of the prison's actual day-to-day security posture. The Bernard incident shattered that comfortable illusion, exposing the devastating truth that a prison is only as secure as the integrity, diligence, and unwavering attention of the human beings who are tasked with guarding its perimeter. This realization forced a complete, total reevaluation of the professional standards required for those who work within the correctional system. No longer could the duty of a correctional officer be viewed as a routine, low-stakes administrative role. It was now universally acknowledged as a critical, high-stress, and fundamentally vital responsibility that stood as the final, absolute barrier between the innocent public and the dangerous individuals who had been removed from it. The training protocols were significantly deepened, incorporating rigorous, scenario-based drills that specifically tested the facility's ability to maintain total control during the quiet, vulnerable hours of the night. The management structure was stripped of its apathy, replaced by a hierarchy that demanded complete transparency, absolute adherence to security protocols, and a proactive, never passive approach to threat assessment. Beyond the institutional reform, the case catalyzed a lasting change in the relationship between the community and the justice system, fostering a new, essential, and much more vigilant form of civic engagement. The residents of the neighborhoods surrounding Tafuna were no longer willing to be passive observers of their own safety. They began to demand and rightfully receive clearer communication from the authorities regarding the security status of the facility, and they cultivated a much stronger, more active, and more collaborative relationship with local law enforcement. This shift in the communal mindset was the most significant long-term byproduct of the trauma they had endured. It recognized that the safety of the individual, the security of the home, and the integrity of the state are inextricably linked, and that the failure of one inevitably leads to the vulnerability of all. This community-based vigilance, which was forged in the fires of personal terror, became a protective, guiding principle for the territory, ensuring that the citizens remained as active, essential partners in their own protection rather than relying solely on the flawed, bureaucratic assurances of the past. The victims, whose immense courage first brought the truth to light, became the unwitting, reluctant, but ultimately powerful catalysts for this social evolution. Their journey from the absolute, paralyzing darkness of the bedroom to the bright, uncompromising clarity of the courtroom provided a moral and ethical compass for the entire community. They demonstrated that the most effective, powerful, and lasting response to systemic corruption and individual malice is the unwavering, persistent, and courageous demand for truth and accountability. As we conclude this profound examination of a dark chapter in American Samoan history, we must acknowledge that while the reforms were successful and the perpetrator was rightfully punished, the trauma endured by the survivors remains an unhealable, permanent part of their narrative. The sanctity of the home, once a universal, assumed, and unconsidered truth for them, had been replaced by a deep, complex, and lifelong awareness of the precariousness of life and the inherent fragility of human security. This case teaches us, with brutal and undeniable clarity, that the monsters we fear are not merely the products of imagination or the creatures of the dark. They are often the direct, inevitable results of the systemic failures of our own institutions. When a society allows its guard to fall, when it prioritizes administrative convenience over professional rigor, and when it forgets that the primary, fundamental, and essential purpose of the justice system is the protection of the innocent, it effectively creates the very environments that allow the most dangerous individuals to thrive and to operate. The story of Bernard is not just a true crime narrative. It is a fundamental, essential, and ongoing warning about the immense, heavy, and non-negotiable cost of institutional apathy. It serves as a reminder to every reader, every citizen, and every public servant that the vigilance required to maintain a safe and orderly society is not a temporary requirement, but a permanent, ongoing, and vital duty. The memory of the Tafuna incident continues to resonate through the corridors of the territorial government, acting as a constant, quiet, and watchful sentinel against the return of the conditions that allowed such a catastrophe to occur in the first place. Every night, as the sun sets over the island and the dark, thick humidity of the tropical night settles over the neighborhoods, the security of the Tafuna Correctional Facility is held by the individuals on duty, guided by the hard-won, dearly bought, and meticulously documented lessons of the past. They operate under the absolute, unwavering understanding that the safety of the entire community, the trust of the citizenry, and the sanctity of the innocent homes in the vicinity are entirely dependent on their professional diligence and their absolute, unwavering commitment to the foundational requirements of their office. The case of Bernard, while horrifying, serves as a permanent, essential, and highly respected institutional memory, a vital, living record that ensures the mistakes of the 1990s are not merely acknowledged as history, but are actively, persistently, and effectively prevented from ever happening again. The transformation of the prison, the awakening of the community, and the ongoing, vigilant maintenance of the rule of law are the true, lasting, and meaningful monuments to the individuals who suffered, and to the survivors who fought with everything they had to restore the order that had been so cruelly, violently, and permanently disrupted. In the final, ultimate, and sobering analysis, we are left to reflect on the immense, profound, and often invisible power of the human spirit when it is pushed to its absolute, final limits. The victims of this case were not merely people who survived a violent, predatory encounter. They were individuals who, through their own, personal, and profoundly agonizing sacrifice, forced an entire society to look at itself in the mirror, to acknowledge its failures, and to commit itself to a more secure, more transparent, and more accountable future. Their story is a testament to the fact that even in the face of the most dark, calculating, and systemic betrayal, there exists an unwavering, resilient, and enduring human capacity for justice. It is this capacity, this deep, fundamental, and persistent demand for the truth that ultimately forms the strongest, most enduring, and most impenetrable barrier against the darkness. As long as there is a citizenry that remembers, a system that learns, and a society that refuses to look away from its own failures, the tragedy of the 1990s will never truly be in vain. It will continue to stand as a powerful, haunting, and vital lesson about the immense, undeniable, and sacred value of the home, the vital, non-negotiable requirement of institutional integrity, and the fundamental, essential duty of every person to remain constantly, actively, and purposefully vigilant in the defense of the innocent, the restoration of order, and the protection of the most deeply personal and precious sanctuary of them all. The island remains peaceful, the streets remain quiet, and the homes remain safe, but this peace is no longer passive, assumed, or taken for granted. It is a peace that is earned, maintained, and protected, day by day, night by night, by a community that remembers the price of its vigilance and values the hard-won security it now possesses. The story of the Tafuna incident, therefore, is not a narrative of the past, but a living, breathing, and essential directive for the present and the future, a constant, silent, and watchful companion that reminds us all that safety is not a destiny we arrive at, but a journey we must walk with absolute, unyielding focus, together and forever, in the pursuit of a society that truly honors, protects, and defends its own from the looming, terrifying, and always lurking darkness that waits just outside the door, waiting for the slightest, most momentary, and most catastrophic lapse in our shared, collective, and unwavering human vigilance. The conclusion of the American Samoa versus Bernard case necessitates a broader contemplation of the inherent, often uncomfortable relationship between the state's monopoly on force and the individual's fundamental right to safety within their own home. When we peel back the layers of this particular narrative, stripping away the sensationalism that often surrounds true crime, we are left with a raw, unsettling examination of the fragility of modern civilization. The case of Bernard serves as a mirror held up to the face of every institution tasked with the administration of justice, reflecting not just the competence or negligence of specific guards or administrators, but the fundamental, often ignored reality that a prison is not a static object. It is a dynamic, living system that is entirely dependent upon the moral and professional character of the individuals who animate it. The tragedy in the 1990s was not merely that a criminal escaped. It was that the system itself, through a process of slow, incremental, and dangerously comfortable degradation, facilitated that escape, turning the very instrument of public safety into the silent, unwitting accomplice of a predator. This realization demands a shift in how we perceive the role of the state in our lives. We have been conditioned to view prisons as distant, abstract entities, black boxes where the inconvenient, the violent, and the unwanted are sequestered away from our sight and our consciousness. The Bernard incident forcefully dismantled this perspective, proving that the distance between the predator in the cage and the innocent family in their bed is often just a matter of institutional willpower. When that willpower wanes, when the vigilance required to maintain the wall between the orderly and the chaotic is replaced by the mundane, rhythmic apathy of bureaucratic routine, the safety of the entire society is placed in immediate, lethal peril. This is the enduring, haunting, and vital lesson that the residents of American Samoa learned in the most painful, permanent, and traumatic manner possible, and it is a lesson that must be integrated into the foundational understanding of every society that values the sanctity of the individual. Furthermore, we must address the profound, often overlooked heroism of the ordinary citizen in the face of extraordinary, systemic betrayal. The survivors of this attack did not choose their role. They were violently thrust into a nightmare that was essentially manufactured by the failures of the people they paid to protect them. Their subsequent, unwavering commitment to the truth, their willingness to relive the most harrowing, intimate, and degrading moment of their lives in the cold, clinical glare of a courtroom, and their refusal to let the narrative be sanitized or buried by the very institutions that were ultimately responsible for their suffering, stands as the most vital, redeeming element of this entire history. They were the ones who finally closed the doors that the prison guards had left standing wide open. They were the ones who provided the light, both literal and metaphorical, that finally revealed the monster hiding in plain sight, protected by the invisible, state-sanctioned veil of a fraudulent alibi. In honoring their resilience, we are not just telling a story of survival, we are acknowledging the fundamental, inherent power of the individual to hold the state accountable, to demand the truth, and to insist that the basic, foundational promise of safety is not a negotiable, secondary concern, but the primary, non-negotiable duty of those who are granted the authority to hold the keys to the prison. Their story acts as a permanent, living, and essential rebuke to every official who would prioritize convenience over security, or who would seek to hide the failures of their institution behind the walls of bureaucracy and silence. As we look toward the future, the lessons of this case must continue to serve as a beacon, guiding the development of penal systems and community safety initiatives that are built upon the pillars of total transparency, rigorous accountability, and a deep, abiding respect for the public trust. The technological advancements that have occurred since the 1990s, the proliferation of biometric security, real-time monitoring systems, and advanced perimeter defense technologies, are undoubtedly valuable tools, but they are never and can never be a substitute for the fundamental, human element of vigilance. Even the most sophisticated, high-tech prison can be circumvented if the people operating the technology become complacent, if the training is ignored, or if the culture of the institution permits the quiet, gradual erosion of standards. The case of Bernard, therefore, remains a cautionary, vital, and eternal reminder that the human spirit is the ultimate, final, and only effective security measure. It is a story that demands that we never settle into a state of passive, unthinking trust, but instead remain consistently, actively, and purposefully engaged in the maintenance of our own collective and individual security. We are the architects of our own safety, and the institutions we create are only as robust, as effective, and as honorable as we choose to hold them to be, day by day, year by year. Ultimately, the narrative of the Tafuna Correctional Facility and the man who terrorized its surrounding community is a story about the intersection of the dark, predatory nature of the individual and the massive, clumsy, and often indifferent nature of the state. It is a collision that occurs all too frequently in the history of human justice, yet it is rarely articulated with such stark, clarifying, and devastating precision as it was in this case. The story continues to demand our attention because it speaks to the most primal, foundational fears of the human experience. The fear of the intruder in the night, the fear of the betrayal of those who are sworn to protect us, and the fear of a world where the walls that we trust to keep us safe are, in reality, nothing more than illusions that we have convinced ourselves are impenetrable. By examining this history, by learning from its tragedies, and by honoring the courage of those who fought to bring the truth to light, we are taking a necessary, proactive step in fortifying our own security, not just in the literal sense of locks and walls, but in the deeper, more important sense of civic awareness and institutional integrity. We are building a reality where the horrific lapses of the past are not allowed to repeat themselves, where the sanctity of the home is respected and protected, and where the justice system is held to the highest, most demanding, and most essential standard of public duty. The path toward a more secure, more accountable, and more just society is never linear, and it is never entirely devoid of failure. It is a difficult, uphill, and never-ending climb that requires the sustained, unified, and unwavering effort of an entire community. The case of Bernard serves as the foundational, essential point of departure for that climb in American Samoa, a moment of profound, painful, and total clarity that redefined the community's relationship with its penal institutions and its own inherent vulnerability. The memory of the event does not haunt the island, but rather provides a grounding, cautionary perspective that ensures that the future remains secure, watchful, and deeply protective of the peace that its citizens have worked so hard to maintain. It is a story that will always be relevant, because the fundamental challenge of maintaining order in a world of persistent darkness is a challenge that never truly ends. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and we are reminded, by the history of this case, that we are the keepers of the peace, the observers of the guard, and the final, absolute judges of the integrity of the systems we entrust with the safety of our homes, our families, and our fundamental, essential, and non-negotiable right to live without the fear of the predator, the failure of the institution, or the violent, sudden shattering of the sanctuary we hold most dear. As we move forward, we carry the lessons of the 1990s with us, not as a weight, but as a source of clarity, a constant, silent, and watchful guide that reminds us of the true price of our security and the incredible, enduring, and powerful strength that resides within the human heart when it is faced with the darkest, most difficult, and most challenging trials of existence. The story of American Samoa versus Bernard is, and will always be, a masterpiece of truth, a painful, ugly, and necessary masterpiece that, in the final analysis, proves that the light of justice, though it may be flickering and weak, can always, through the sheer, stubborn, and courageous persistence of the human spirit, be made to shine through even the thickest, most impenetrable, and most deceptive shadows of the dark. The final synthesis of this haunting narrative brings us to the profound realization that justice, while often conceptualized as a cold, bureaucratic process, is at its very core a deeply human, emotional, and intensely personal endeavor. When we review the entirety of the American Samoa versus Bernard case, from the first, chilling moments of that silent, nocturnal breach to the final, thunderous condemnation delivered in the halls of justice, we are not merely documenting a chronological sequence of criminal acts and legal responses. We are, instead, exploring the essential, fragile, and often chaotic relationship between the sanctity of human life and the institutions we create to protect it. The case remains a resonant, living part of the territorial memory, not because it provides us with an easy, satisfying conclusion where all the pieces fit perfectly into place, but because it challenges us to accept the uncomfortable, persistent reality that our safety is perpetually caught in the balance between systemic integrity and individual depravity. The Bernard incident was a masterclass in the manipulation of systemic vulnerabilities, a terrifying, calculated, and highly intelligent effort to weaponize the very structures meant to contain him. His ability to exploit the administrative rot at the Tafuna Correctional Facility was not merely a failure of security, but a failure of the collective awareness that is necessary to prevent such predatory movements from ever taking hold. It serves as a permanent, undeniable, and essential reminder that the security of our communities is never a passive, set-and-forget condition. It is a dynamic, active, and demanding responsibility that rests upon the shoulders of every single person involved in the maintenance of the public order. We must also continue to center the profound, enduring, and essential humanity of the survivors, whose lives were not just affected but fundamentally redefined by this invasion. Their experience demonstrates the staggering, immense, and often unrecognized bravery required to confront a system that has failed you, to look directly at the face of your tormentor when the natural human instinct is to hide, to turn away, or to forget. Their resilience is the true, lasting victory in this narrative, a victory that resonates far beyond the confines of the courtroom or the pages of the legal record. They force the system to see them, to listen to them, and to act in accordance with the truth that they provided, and in doing so, they provided a vital, essential, and life-saving correction to a failing institution. Their willingness to bear witness, to stand tall against the overwhelming, institutionalized resistance that often characterizes such cases, provides us with the most powerful, necessary, and enduring lesson of all, that justice is not something that is simply granted by the state, but something that must be persistently, courageously, and actively demanded by those who have been wronged. This demand for accountability is the absolute, foundational engine of a just society, and it is a requirement that never, under any circumstances, truly expires. As we reach the conclusion of this extensive, multi-part examination, we find ourselves at the edge of a new, profound, and enlightened understanding of the interconnectedness of our lives. The darkness that Bernard brought into that bedroom was not an isolated, singular event. It was a symptom of a larger, systemic, and deeply concerning neglect. It forced the territory to reconcile with its own failures, to audit its own institutions, and to reaffirm its commitment to the basic, essential rights of its citizens. The transformation that followed was not achieved through simple, superficial changes, but through a painful, necessary, and deeply thorough scrubbing of the institutional rot that had been allowed to fester. Every new, modernized security protocol at Tafuna, every change in the administrative philosophy, every increased level of transparency and public oversight is a testament to the sacrifice, the trauma, and the incredible, enduring strength of the survivors. They are the architects of the safer, more secure future that the territory now enjoys, and their presence, though often quiet and private, is permanently woven into the institutional DNA of the correctional system itself. The story is a monument, a guide, and a warning, and it serves to ensure that the memory of the past continues to actively, purposefully, and effectively guard the safety of the present. The legacy of the case also extends to the broader world of criminal justice, offering a global, sobering, and essential case study in the consequences of administrative apathy. In a world where prisons are often increasingly detached from the public consciousness, where the plight of the incarcerated and the failures of their keepers are rarely given the attention they deserve, the story of Bernard reminds us that the problems of the penal system are everyone's problems. When a system that is supposed to be holding the most dangerous and violent individuals among us fails, the consequences do not remain contained within the walls of the facility. They spill out into our streets, our neighborhoods, and our bedrooms. The case demands that we remain cognizant, engaged, and actively concerned about the state of our correctional facilities, not out of a sense of voyeuristic curiosity, but out of an essential, fundamental necessity for the protection of our own lives and the lives of those we love. It is a clarion call for the ongoing, persistent, and rigorous auditing of the institutions we task with the most serious and consequential of public duties. It is a reminder that the cost of our safety is an eternal, unwavering, and vital vigilance, a duty that we must never surrender, never minimize, and never, ever take for granted. Ultimately, the journey from the dark night of the invasion to the bright, final resolution of the trial and the subsequent, systemic reform has been a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the persistence of the rule of law. The shadows that once loomed large, terrifying, and unchallenged have been permanently pushed back, not by the mere passage of time, but by the intentional, focused, and collective action of a society that decided it would no longer tolerate the existence of such a violent, predatory threat. The peace that now pervades the island, the sense of security that the residents of the Tafuna neighborhood now enjoy, is the hard-won, dearly purchased, and most cherished result of an incredibly difficult, harrowing, and deeply transformative history. It is a peace that is built on the ruins of a nightmare, and it is a peace that is maintained by the living, breathing memory of the price that was paid to achieve it. The case of American Samoa versus Bernard is, and will forever remain, a definitive chapter in the story of this territory, a narrative of darkness that was transformed into a catalyst for the light, a story of failure that was rectified through the sheer, stubborn, and courageous insistence on the truth, and a story of a vulnerability that was, through the persistence of the survivors, ultimately and definitively strengthened. We move forward, carrying the weight and the wisdom of this history, with a renewed, sharpened, and deeply appreciative understanding of the precarious, vital, and non-negotiable nature of the security we strive for every single day. We understand that our homes are the most intimate, personal, and important sanctuaries we possess, and that the protection of those sanctuaries is a collaborative, ongoing, and vital endeavor that involves us all. We are the guardians of our own peace, the watchers of our own institutions, and the enduring, persistent voice that demands, insists, and ensures that the fundamental promise of justice and order is never again allowed to falter, to fail, or to vanish into the dark, indifferent, and destructive shadows of systemic neglect. The story is concluded, but the vigilance it demands is eternal, a constant, silent, and watchful companion that walks with us, guiding our steps, informing our choices, and ensuring that we never, ever return to the terrifying, insecure, and vulnerable reality of that dark, long-ago night. It is a story of human triumph in the face of impossible odds, a story of the power of the individual to change the world, and a story that will continue to echo, to inspire, and to warn for as long as we continue to strive for a world defined by the light of truth, the strength of the community, and the absolute, unwavering, and total protection of the innocent, the vulnerable, and the deeply, profoundly, and essentially cherished sanctuary of the home, forever and always, in the pursuit of the enduring, perfect, and most fundamental promise of a secure and just society. As we reach this final reflection on the case of American Samoa versus Bernard, we are compelled to look beyond the immediate facts and the legal outcomes to contemplate the nature of the shadow itself, the shadow that exists in the heart of the criminal and the shadow that lingers in the corridors of institutional failure. This story has been a descent into the deepest anxieties of the human condition, an exploration of what happens when the structures we build to categorize, contain, and control the darker impulses of society become, in themselves, conduits for that very darkness. It is a narrative that resists a simplistic resolution, demanding instead that we grapple with the persistent, uncomfortable truth that the systems we trust are inherently fallible, constructed by fallible people, and subject to the slow, corrosive influence of apathy. The Bernard incident was not merely a criminal anomaly, it was a profound, systemic warning about the danger of letting the abstract concept of order replace the concrete, daily reality of vigilance. When we delegate the protection of our lives to a system, we do not divest ourselves of the responsibility to witness, to question, and to verify. The survivors of this tragedy, through their unbearable suffering and their subsequent, magnificent courage, effectively redefine the relationship between the citizen and the state in American Samoa, proving that the silent, passive acceptance of institutional assurances is not safety, but a dangerous, fragile state of self-deception. The institutional legacy of this case is now ingrained in the very concrete and policy of the Tafuna Correctional Facility, serving as a permanent, silent advisor to every new generation of staff and every incoming administrator. The lessons learned during that era of intense, public-facing scrutiny were not meant to be archived. They were meant to be practiced, honored, and upheld as the primary, defining philosophy of the facility. Every modern security upgrade, every refined protocol, and every rigorous check conducted in the quiet hours of the night is a direct, living tribute to the truth that was brought to light in that courtroom. We understand now, with a clarity that was bought at a devastatingly high personal price, that the security of the public is an active, demanding, and relentless pursuit that requires the total, undivided, and unwavering focus of every individual tasked with the administration of justice. It is a realization that has successfully stripped away the illusions of the past and replaced them with a culture of active, transparent, and highly accountable professionalism, ensuring that the vulnerability which allowed for that night of horror has been fundamentally and irreversibly neutralized. The prison has been reclaimed not just as a physical site of confinement, but as a morally sound and professionally responsible arm of the state's duty, reflecting the community's demand for order, safety, and the unwavering enforcement of the law. The human element of this story, the survivors, the investigators, and the community members, remains the most essential, powerful, and enduring testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Their lives are the living proof that the impact of a crime as severe as this cannot be measured solely by the years of a prison sentence or the revisions of a policy manual. It is measured in the quiet, persistent, and brave reclamation of the self that occurs in the months and years following a profound, life-shattering trauma. The victims did not allow themselves to be defined by the violence that was visited upon them. They redefined the terms of their own existence, choosing to act as the primary, decisive force for systemic change and the ultimate, final arbiters of the justice they deserved. Their journey, while deeply personal and fundamentally private, has become a public, communal inheritance, a shared source of strength, and a persistent, guiding light for a territory that has learned, through the most difficult experience imaginable, that the strength of a society is not measured by the height of its prison walls, but by the courage of its citizens when they are faced with the unthinkable. We honor them not because they were victims, but because they were the heroes of their own salvation, the ones who stared into the dark, saw the truth, and forced the entire society to do the same. As we look to the future, we carry the wisdom of this narrative as a constant, essential guide for the preservation of our collective and individual peace. We remain cognizant that the threat of the intruder, the risk of systemic failure, and the danger of apathy are not ghosts of the past, but persistent, potential realities that require our ongoing, active, and eternal commitment. The sanctity of our homes, the security of our families, and the order of our communities are not gifts bestowed by the state. They are fragile, precious, and essential conditions that we must nurture, defend, and actively maintain through our shared, collective vigilance. This case taught us that we are the observers of our own guards, the ultimate overseers of our own justice system, and the primary, essential protectors of our own fundamental rights to safety and well-being. We move forward with the knowledge that our collective history is a part of who we are, that the lessons of the 1990s are not merely historical data, but vital, living principles that continue to inform our choices, our expectations, and our actions as we work to build a future defined by the absolute, total, and uncompromising protection of the innocent. This story of American Samoa versus Bernard is, and will forever be, a complete, self-contained study of the profound, complex, and essential struggle between the forces of order and the encroaching shadows of the dark. It is a story that has touched upon the very foundations of the social contract, exploring the heavy, non-negotiable cost of justice, the immense, undeniable value of the human spirit, and the fundamental, essential duty of a community to stand together against the threats that seek to divide, to terrify, and to diminish it. We are left with a final, lingering, and vital understanding that while we may live in a world that is inherently unpredictable and often dangerous, we are not helpless, we are not alone, and we are not defined by the violence that may be visited upon us. We are defined by our persistence, our courage, and our collective, unwavering refusal to surrender the light of our truth to the cold, encroaching, and persistent shadows of the dark. The memory of this case will continue to serve as a beacon, a constant, silent, and watchful sentinel over the peaceful, quiet, and secure streets of the island, a testament to the fact that justice, when pursued with total, unrelenting, and absolute conviction, can eventually, truly, and permanently prevail against even the most deceptive, entrenched, and systemic failures of the human world. We leave this narrative, fully recognizing that the peace we now enjoy is a hard-won, cherished, and fundamental achievement of the entire community, a peace that we must treat with the respect, the diligence, and the profound, abiding care that it so richly deserves. The dark night of the invasion is over. The monster is rightfully and permanently removed from our midst, and the system that failed us has been thoroughly, effectively, and definitively reformed. We look forward with the confidence of a people who have stared into the abyss, survived the nightmare, and emerged on the other side with a stronger, deeper, and more profound commitment to the safety of each other, the integrity of our institutions, and the absolute, total, and enduring sanctity of the home. The story of Bernard, in its horrific detail and its ultimate, just conclusion, remains an essential part of the tapestry of this territory, a story that will continue to guide, to warn, and to inspire for as long as we continue to value the quiet, peaceful, and essentially beautiful lives we have worked so hard to build, to protect, and to secure. May the light of this truth always burn brightly, and may the vigilance of our community always remain, as it must, the final, absolute, and impenetrable shield against any shadow that would dare to threaten the sanctity of the innocent, the safety of our homes, and the fundamental, essential, and non-negotiable promise of justice for all. The The final chapter of this profound and harrowing narrative forces us to step back from the specific details of the Tafuna Correctional Facility and the individual crimes of Bernard to consider the broader, existential necessity of vigilance within a functioning society. When we reflect on the totality of this case, we are not merely recounting a historical event or a catalogue of failures. We are engaging in a necessary, solemn act of remembrance that reaffirms the absolute, non-negotiable value of the rule of law. The systemic breakdown that allowed a violent offender to exploit the prison system like a phantom was a singular, catastrophic event, but the underlying vulnerability it exposed, the potential for institutional apathy to override the fundamental safety of the public, is a perpetual, universal challenge. In the decade and more since these events transpired, the world has become increasingly complex, interconnected, and technologically advanced, yet the core, human-centric nature of the social contract remains entirely unchanged. We rely on institutions to hold the line against chaos, but we are reminded by this history that these institutions are only as strong as the integrity of the individuals who represent them. The case of American Samoa versus Bernard is, and will remain, an essential touchstone because it illustrates so vividly that the distance between absolute, terrifying vulnerability and the secure, orderly life we hold dear is often bridged by nothing more than the quality of a single guard's focus or the diligence of an administrator's oversight. This history teaches us that the pursuit of justice is not a singular destination, but a continuous, demanding, and vital process that must be renewed and reinforced by every generation. The trauma experienced by the victims and the subsequent, historic efforts they undertook to ensure that justice was served should not be viewed as a closed loop in the past. Rather, it serves as an ongoing, living model for the active, engaged citizenry that every healthy society requires. Their decision to step out of the shadows of their trauma and into the clinical, harsh, and often intimidating light of the courtroom is a powerful, enduring lesson in the nature of civic duty. It reminds us that justice is not something the state merely provides to the passive recipient. It is something that must be championed, demanded, and protected by those who believe in its necessity. When the system falters, as it so tragically did in the Tafuna incident, it is the voice of the victim and the persistence of the community that must ultimately serve as the corrective, guiding force that brings the institution back to its core, intended purpose. This is the most enduring, meaningful, and transformative legacy that the survivors have left for their community. The understanding that their own voices, their own courage, and their own refusal to be silent were the most effective, powerful, and essential tools in the rectification of a broken and dangerous state of affairs. As we move further away from the 1990s, the institutional landscape of American Samoa continues to evolve, incorporating new layers of security, better training, and more rigorous standards of conduct. These advancements are necessary, and they represent the community's commitment to never again allow such a catastrophic failure to occur. However, the most important barrier to any future transgression is not a physical wall, an electronic lock, or a complex security algorithm. It is the shared, collective, and unwavering memory of the Bernard case. It is the awareness that such a disaster is possible, and that the only effective defense against it is a society that remains profoundly skeptical of institutional infallibility and consistently committed to the active oversight of the entities it empowers. We must continue to teach this history, not to dwell on the horror of the crime, but to keep the vital, essential spirit of vigilance alive. We must ensure that the lessons learned from the sacrifice of the victims are not forgotten, but are instead integrated into the foundational understanding of every citizen, every public official, and every individual who shares the responsibility for the safety of our territory. The memory of this case is a safeguard, a persistent, silent, and watchful sentinel that guards against the complacency that leads to institutional rot and, eventually, to the destruction of the innocent lives that the system is sworn to protect. The story also forces us to consider the burden of the public servant and the immense, heavy responsibility that comes with the power to confine others. For those who choose the career of a correctional officer, the daily, rhythmic demands of their role can often mask the gravity of the potential consequences of their failures. The Bernard case acts as a permanent, chilling, and essential reminder to every officer on duty that their actions, or their lack thereof, have a direct, measurable, and often lethal impact on the lives of people they have never met. It elevates the role from one of mere monitoring to one of profound, social, and existential stewardship. When the guards are alert, when they are trained, and when they possess the moral courage to hold their peers and their institution to the highest possible standards, the entire structure of the community's safety is strengthened. The Bernard incident, while a testament to the dangers of failure, also serves as a catalyst for a higher, more demanding, and more noble standard of public service, one that prioritizes the public's trust above all other considerations. It reminds those in power that they are not merely the custodians of a prison, but the primary, essential defenders of the public's peace, and that their professional integrity is the ultimate, final, and absolute foundation of the society they are tasked with securing. As we look toward the future, we do so with a deeper, more refined, and more resilient sense of our collective identity. We are a community that has faced a profound, existential threat, a betrayal of our most basic expectations, and we have emerged from that crucible not diminished, but strengthened by the hard-won clarity that we have gained. We have reclaimed the sanctity of our homes, not by walling ourselves off from the world, but by opening our eyes to the reality of the threats that exist and choosing to confront them with the full, unwavering force of our communal vigilance. The island remains beautiful, the nights remain quiet, and the homes remain safe, but we now understand the depth, the complexity, and the fragility of this existence in a way that we never did before. We are a community that knows the cost of its safety, values the labor of its maintenance, and deeply, truly, and profoundly respects the essential, non-negotiable right of every individual to live in peace, in security, and in the absolute, total, and uncompromising absence of the fear that we once knew. This narrative, concluded in its retelling, remains an enduring, vital, and essential part of our history, a story that serves as the foundation for the peace we now cherish. We acknowledge the darkness, we honor the courage of those who fought to bring it to light, and we pledge, individually and collectively, that the history of American Samoa will never again be defined by such a catastrophic failure of the public trust. We remain, as we must always be, the watchful guardians of our own justice, the persistent voices for the truth, and the unwavering defenders of the sanctity of the home. The story of Bernard is a memory, a lesson, and a warning, but most of all, it is an enduring testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome the most difficult, challenging, and destructive forces of the human world. As the years continue to pass, we carry this knowledge with us as a source of strength, a source of clarity, and a source of the absolute, unshakable conviction that justice, when supported by the courage of the community and the vigilance of the citizen, will always, ultimately, and forever endure. The nightmare is over. The lessons have been learned, and the future, built on the foundations of truth and accountability, is ours to maintain, to cherish, and to protect with all the focus, all the energy, and all the unwavering and absolute commitment that our safety demands.